the Woman King.
Oh.
And the uproar on this has been absolutely fascinating to me to watch. So, on the one hand, you've got a bunch of actually, I guess they're kind of together. Usually, I would say that these white conservative commentators are kind of in their just own lane, hating on anything that's all black. But this is actually one of those rare situations where there's a bunch of black commentators that are actually aligning with them. And what they're basically saying is the Woman King highlights an African tribe that is well known for being heavily involved in the slave trade, bringing African people here to America and enslaving them, and that therefore it's disrespectful to the African American community for this movie to be coming out. So, for those who are not aware, The Woman King stars Viola Davis, and it's about this all female regiment of soldiers who they fight together with the men, and they're basically going up against Europeans who are trying to take their land and essentially take over the area. And so there are a lot of people upset, basically saying, how dare you try to show this tribe in a positive light? Hudson, what are your thoughts?
So I I can understand the people who have a sour taste in their mouths about this. You know, Zora Neale Hurston's book. I can't quite. The name of the book escapes me, but it's a book where she interviewed former slaves who were still alive at that time when she wrote it.
Hmm.
And she came across one of the more famous interviews that she had out of that book. It turns out that he was actually captured by the how you pronounce it, Dahomey.
Yeah.
He was actually captured by them and sold to the Europeans and sold into slavery. That's how he had gotten
Hmm.
to America. So it really hit home for a lot of people. One of the people who's really going hard in the paint on this is Nas.
Really?
Yeah, Nas has been going hard on this. Like y'all do not need to boycott this movie. Y'all do not need to watch this movie.
Hmm.
And basically the outcry is that they're downplaying. The complaint is that they're glorifying these women when they fought for to keep the slave trade and were a big part of the slave trade. And
Hmm.
also they feel like they're downplaying uh, their participation in the slave trade in the movie. So it's kind of a
Hmm.
double edged kind of thing here, right?
Hmm.
And so what some of the creators of the movie and some of the stars kind of came back with was with movies you take some creative license. A lot of the movie is fictionalized. While it's based on true events, a lot of it's fictionalized to come on the screen. Basically, they're saying that they made a lot of shit up to
Hmm.
to make it an action-packed movie for you to watch it.
Hmm.
Right? So
Hmm.
it's about as true as anything I could write and just make up in my head, except that uh, a specific event happened where these women actually existed,
Hmm.
right, in a time period. So I think that has to be taken into account as well. And one of the arguments was like Paid in Full and movies like American Gangster, where people argue that, hey, these guys in those movies in real life, they were super brutal. Like
Right.
they were incredibly
Killers.
violent, and they really downplayed that in the movies just so that they can make it watchable for more general audiences.
Hmm.
And they're kind of saying this is along the same lines as far as creative licenses is, we're trying to make it watchable. Um, so from my perspective, I'm gonna just say I haven't seen the movie,
Hmm.
but I'm going to see it. And I can understand all the arguments, but honestly, I won't know how I feel until I see it. You know, I can understand where everyone's coming from, but I have to make the decision on my own as to whether they're giving any justice to the actual what would be the source material.
Hmm.
Right now, what plays against it for me is that it was written and produced by white women, which, you know, I think from my perspective, I would feel a little bit more authenticity here if I had known that it was black women, at the very least black people who written this thing, as opposed to, so I would feel a little better about it. But I'm going to try to go into it with an open mind, watch it, and see what I think for myself as far as that, along with doing more research on what would be the source material for this thing before I try to cast too much judgment on it.
So, from my perspective, like you, I do plan to see it. In fact, I'm going to try to see it this weekend. So, if we do that, maybe the next episode we can have a little review of it and revisit this topic. Uh, if I remember correctly, the director of this movie is a black woman, and I thought that she also helped co-write it. So she wasn't like the main writer, but she was like involved with writing this movie. Um, my understanding is that there's definitely revisionist history in this movie, where in real life, this tribe was heavily involved in the slave trade and heavily involved in ensuring that the slave trade would continue. Whereas, you know, again, I haven't seen the movie yet, but my understanding is the movie, they try to portray this trade, they try to portray this tribe as fighting against the Europeans to stop the slave trade, which is definitely not what happened in real life. When this whole thing broke out, and I saw a lot of people talking about it on social media, what I immediately came back to is all the movies, books, stories, things of that nature that have come out regarding the founding fathers and how almost none of these entities ever really seriously deal with how all of them were slave owners. And especially when I look at these conservatives who are
Mm-hmm.
complaining so much and are so concerned with the slave trade, the way the slave trade is portrayed in this movie, but they have none of those concerns in properties that deal with the founding fathers. To me, it comes off as extremely hypocritical. Now, from the perspective of black folks who are complaining, I'm not going to call it hypocritical, but I just don't agree. I just don't agree. I'm tired of the only black movies we get. Either it's another Martin Luther King movie, or it's a movie about us being abused, or it's some sort of stupid comedy. Like black movies, there's been like in fact, yeah, since really I've been born, black movies have kind of always been in the same vein. They've all fit into one of like four or five lanes, and really you don't go outside of that. And
Mm-hmm.
Woman King is different from anything that we've ever seen before in Hollywood, as
Mm-hmm.
far as how black people are portrayed. And I, for one, deeply appreciate it. I deeply appreciate it's not another movie about a bunch of black thugs. It's not a movie that's centered around ignorance. It's not a movie about us acting silly and stupid for the entertainment of an audience. It is a slice of history, mind you, revisionist history, that tries to portray black people as having some degree of agency and power and fighting for land that we actually own, that we are actually the rulers of. Yeah, I understand that it's white women who wrote it. I think it's disappointing that so many black people who are in a position to be able to choose what type of movies they do have not chosen to write about African tribes or black people who are in control of their own lives and are willing and are able to really fight back in a real way. How many slave movies have we gotten in the past 15 years? How many movies about black pain, where we're either being murdered by police officers or being abused by police officers, have we gotten in the last 15 years? It is the same shit
Yeah.
over and over and over again. And Nas doesn't have a problem with any of that. He's like, oh, those movies are great. But all of a sudden, you have a problem with this one. Nah, I'm sorry. Nas just in general irritates me. Like, I appreciate the artistry and I appreciate him as a rapper. But as far as like the times he chooses to try to speak out and try to use his platform to move black people to do something, I think oftentimes it's very grotesque. I remember when him and the game were coming out together and trying to tell black people that essentially they should turn against Jesse Jackson because the game and Nas were going to be the ones to try to who were going to fill that void and be the ones to stand up on issues that were really affecting the black community. And I'm like, bro, no, you're not. You ain't never organized a march before. You ain't never stood, in front of no politicians and tried to fight for black rights. This is all bullshit.
The
This is
people
all
probably
bullshit to try
spoke
to
quick
pump
on
you up.
that. Like, nah.
You're right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Come on now. Come on now. So like when when I see Nas speaking publicly on stuff, again, as a rapper, I think he's incredible. I take nothing from him. But as far as how he chooses to use his voice and his platform, come on. I think there's a whole lot to be desired left to be desired. And just in general, again, I feel like there's just a lot of black folks who just don't take enough care when they're considering what kind of images we want to portray about ourselves. Yes, again, Woman King is revisionist history, but I think it's incredible. It's an incredible opportunity to portray black people in a different light than we've ever been seen before. And without having seen the movie, for right now, I appreciate it.
Well, it's the Woman King is not the only movie in history and won't be the last that has portrayed a controversial figure that is made to be the protagonist but has some antagonist type deals. It's not going to be the first. It's not the first. Not going to be the last. So that's one. And then two, what I always try to remember and keep in mind is that America changed the game. Europeans changed the game when they brought slaves over to America and over to the islands over here and all that. They totally changed the game, right? They did things that weren't really happening before, such as making slavery life for life. Making sure that your children were born into slavery. Like, these were things that weren't generally practiced, right? We got to remember that in a lot of societies, slaves were still treated with respect.
Indentured servitude.
Slavery was a temporary condition as opposed to a permanent one in a lot of areas. So to really know what they thought was going on, in the Americas, I can't say for sure that they knew or didn't know. I mean, certainly there were some ambassadors, I'm sure, that visited and traveled through seas, but what would they really let these ambassadors see in these other countries? Did you go to the big house and see just the people in the fancy tuxes holding the wine, offering you wine and things like, oh, well, he's dressed nice. Okay, he seems to be, all right. I doubt that they would let those ambassadors go into a field in South Carolina and see them working these people 25 hours a day, right? I doubt they will let them see that. So, who knows what they actually knew about what was going on over there. I mean, essentially, I like the way Roots portrayed it, right? And it's a very subtle, powerful way that, to me, they portrayed it. And I don't know that many people think about it this way, but essentially when Kunta Kinte was brought over to the Americas, that was it. You didn't even get a whiff of Africa after that, right? There was no emotional shot of the family he left behind over there that were
Hmm.
weeping for him. There was none of that. It was all once he got to America, that was it.
Hmm.
You saw nothing else,
Hmm.
right? You heard of nothing else, right? He was completely the attempt was first to completely strip him of his old identity over in Africa,
Hmm.
right? And you got to think that worked both ways. Did they
Hmm.
really want the people in Africa to know? Not that it would have deterred a lot of these tribes, I'm sure, but a
Right.
lot of them, I'm sure, would have been like, "No, we not gonna no,
Hmm.
we're not gonna give you our people so you can treat them like that." So I would assume it worked both ways,
Hmm.
where it was just a straight, "Y'all don't know what we do with them.
Right.
Y'all have no clue."
Yeah.
And you were too scared to go and see for yourself on the shores because you were scared that you were going to get caught
Come
and
on now.
thrown on one of those ships.
Come on
So,
now.
right. So I got to think it worked both ways. And I think that was a powerful way for Roots to portray it. And it makes me think about that often is what did they know about what was going on here in America at that time? So how much do we really want to beat them up
Hmm.
over slavery, which was common practice in a lot of civilizations?
Hmm.
How much do we really want to beat them up about the transatlantic slave trade when I honestly don't think that they had credible knowledge of what could have been going on over there?